Okay, so we've talked about the M probability, which is the probability that the two rows are a match. So in other words, what we're doing there is we're taking the evidence, that is the firm name, we're blocking on the city, and the firm address, and then we're trying to say what's the probability, the M probability is what it's called, that it's a match. Now, we also want to figure out the U probability, or the probability, not quite grammatically correct, but it's an unmatch. So we've got an M probability, the probability it's a match, a U probability, the probability it's an unmatch. So what are we going to do that the probability that a field agrees, given that they're actually not the same thing? So it's one way to think about it is it's the probability that two records just randomly match. My name's Julia Lane. Turns out there are several other Julia Lanes in the world. What's the probability that of all the rows here and all the rows here, that you randomly put two Julia Lanes together who are actually not the same Julia Lane? So if you just stop and think about that for a minute, you'll realize that the probability that two Julia Lanes are the same, there's some odds of that. The probability of two John Smiths being the same is higher. The probability of, I don't know, Zbigniew Brzezinski is the same, is that those two things randomly match, is even lower. Now, the second thing that you'll realize is that that is corpus dependent. What I mean by corpus dependent is that two John Smiths are very likely to show up in a British phone directory. Two Zbigniew Brzezinski are very unlikely to show up in a British directory. However, the John Smith is unlikely to show up if I'm looking at a Chinese directory. So the corpus within which I'm making the decisions is going to be very, very, very important here. Having said that, the notion here that two records are going to randomly match is going to depend obviously on the corpus. That's the unprobability. So how are we going to do that? Well, for the particular example that we're talking about, which is firm data, let's make up some numbers. So the probability that the firm names are going to match, well, it turns out if you take a look at the corpus in Illinois and Indiana, there are a total of 1,943 dynamic small businesses that are registered in those two states. So, just common sense is 1 out of 1943 times that I look at a small business, I'm going to pull out the same record. The firm address, well, there are 16,213 roads in Illinois and Indiana. Of course, once you go down to the actual number, it's going to be different. But anyway, you see the point. So it'd be 1 over 16,213. And the number of cities, you can look at the corpus. There are 3,529 cities. So that gives you a starting point to figure out how random these things are going to be. Maybe when you have additional information, you'll make different decisions. But as a rough starting point for pedagogical purposes, that's where we're going to start. Okay, so now, here's going back to the basic idea. I have 10 records in one field. I've got, in one database, I've got 12 records in the other. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and get the computer to figure out how close are they. I'm going to assign a match probability, I'm going to assign a non-match probability, and I'm going to make a decision. So the agreement weight, if you think about it, is just going to be the match divided by the unmatch. We're going to log it because those numbers get to be big, so you want to kind of squish them up with a monotonic transformation, and the log's always a useful thing to do. The disagreement rate is the log of 1 minus the match divided by 1 minus the unmatched probability. So those two, very standard approach to making those comparisons. And then what we're going to do, and you'll see kind of the brute force approach here, we're simply going to take those weights. We're going to take name of the company and the address of the company, and we're going to add them up. We're going to add those log things up. So we're going to calculate the match and unmatch of each pairwise comparison, and then we're just going to take that result and rank them. Now you'll see immediately, I hope, you're thinking, oh, but the name of a company could be parsed out. It could be first name or the name and then incorporated really as a separate thing. We should have broken that out into two. And in fact, when you do blocking and parsing, you do that. And then you might want to say, well, the street number and the street name, and then whether it's an avenue or a road or a drive, are really separate pieces of information. You should parse those out and put separate probabilities. If we were doing this for real instead of a pedagogical example, of course you'd block it out into the smallest unit. But for now, we're just going to take them in brute force, just so to get the point across. So now, in the example we have, we're going to look at the SAM number 212572 and 1167. And we're going to calculate those M and U probabilities. And what you're going to see is when you just do that brute force calculation, you get a number of 25.33. And you can do the arithmetic. I'm not going to work it out for you. So you get a number of 25.133. What does that number mean? Nothing, right? It's just a number that is it's calculated, and it's got the property that if you assume that all of these things are equally weighted in importance, it's going to enable you to rank the different pairwise calculations. So then you're going to tell me, oh, but I think having the name of the company gives you more information than the street address. Okay, if you want to do that, you could add a higher weight to that log that was associated with the name. You might want to say, oh, I'm going to make it 5 times the weight or 10 times the weight. So you just have 10 times the log of 0.95 over 0.005147, and then the second thing, which you're going to downweight, might just be valued at 1 or a half or whatever. Whatever you do, you'd want to make the same weighting system across the calculations. So, anyway, for now, for the simple example, this number is 25.33. When I look at the second pair, 42449 compared to 644, so that's comparing. Record number 42449 on the transaction file, the SAM file, with the SBE file, index number 644, do the same calculation, I come up with a number 14.816. So, you know immediately that I am putting a higher weight on that first pairwise thing as being a match than on the second pairwise thing. Now let's look at the third comparison. And I'm comparing in this one sorry, I lost my place, got too excited there. I am comparing 249351 with 1022, and do exactly the same calculation. I come up with a number 2.178. So now I have, for every one of those 120 rows or comparisons, what I have is a number that is a score based on my priors and my posterior assumptions and the relative importance I have given to each field, which in this case is equal importance. I now have a score of match quality. So then you say, well, how am I going to make the decision about what's the same? And the answer is of course, you're going to take a look. You're going to take a look at the top 20. You're going to eyeball them, say, yeah, those are clearly matches. Then go down to the middle section, and you're going to say, I'm going to have to think about those. And then you're going to go down to the worst scoring ones, and you're saying, clearly those are not a match. So now what's going to happen, you're going to have a lower threshold, as you can see on this picture. You're going to have some that are clearly matches, some that are clearly non-matches, and some where I'm going to have to make a decision. Now, if you think about it, this is exactly what happens every day. Think about when you go into, and you go through TSA at the airport. So most of the time you go through and it's a clear match. You're free to go. You can go straight through. Sometimes they're going to look at you and they say, I'm not sure. I want to take a closer look. That's when you've got to pull aside the screening. And that's exactly what's going on. You're in the match, non-match range. So exactly where you end up is going to depend on where you set the upper threshold and the lower threshold. And that pulls me right back to the beginning of the story that we started with, which is the notion that you have to look at the data. It's a judgment call for some of these as to whether these are the same entities, whether it's a small business signed up with the federal government, whether you're a terrorist going through airport screening. At any point, you've got identifying characteristics in two files. You're making the comparison against them. So 2 files, compare, classify, match, non-match. So I walked you through a whole lot of thinking about that. It's a fascinating field, and you'll enjoy learning more about record linkage as you read more of these books.